happy to introduce Alfiya. So our topic today, obviously you're all here, public engagement and disability challenges and opportunities. And I know a lot of you that I see the faces are very involved with this discussion. So I think it's going to be, or this topic. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. But Alfiya, as you all know, is our old compadre colleague at Spinal Cord Injury BC. So now with an assistant prof in the School of Humanitarian Studies at Royal Roads in Victoria, and holds a PhD in disability studies and master's in public administration. So I'm just going to hand it off to her for her amazing presentation today.
Thank you, Terry. And hi, everyone. So nice to be surrounded by a group of people I know and who I've met, most of you. Thank you for welcoming me here today. I know some of you are familiar with some of the things I'll be talking about, so apologies if some of this will be repetitive. But this project has been a labor of love for the last few months, for sure. And just still planning for the next phase of this work. But I'm happy to tell you how it started, what are some of the things I learned in the process, and we'll be excited to maybe talk to you to see how we can further develop this project, because there's lots of potential there. I just definitely need to carve out some time to work on it. So I am joining you here, logging in today from the unceded traditional lands of the Wakwangan speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. In my place in Langford here, in my home office in Langford. Very grateful to the Indigenous peoples for taking care of this land. So I've had the privilege of taking part in the National Indigenous Day celebrations on Royal Roads campus on last Friday, and actually had a chance to see Richard Peter there, which was really great to connect with him there. So today I am gonna focus on covering some background of this work, telling you a little bit about the project, some of the key components of the project, focus on the findings, and then just discussing some plans. And I think at that point it can be fairly informal. We can have a chat and conversation. I don't have to share my screen at that point. Before we begin, though, I would like to ask you a question. Or you can either use your phone to take a picture of this QR code, or go to menti.com and enter a code 68302059. And the question is, what matters to you in a public engagement process? And of course, the context can be different. You might think of it in terms of a more, maybe research-related engagement, or you might think of it in terms of some other broader engagement, municipal engagement, which is my area of work. But yeah, just what are some of the things that matters to you in this? And let me just wait for you to pop in your responses. Can be 1 or 2 words, sentence, accessible to all from either an online or in person. Absolutely. Voices from many different types of disabilities, people ready to listen and learn. Yes, 2 very important points here for sure. Having people included who have expertise to answer questions and facilitate the process. Having people who have lived experience is also important to me. I'm here because of my experience with many. Great. I would love to learn from you as well.
There's also in the chat too. I'm going to put
Okay.
something
Yes.
in the chat as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Terry. This is just for us to start thinking about this topic. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about what brought me to this to this topic and why I'm interested in it. Oh, sorry, Marnie, you wanted to share something. You have a...
Just while I'm thinking about it, yeah, like not all seniors, have computers or cell phones, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's a big thing that people don't necessarily think about nowadays. You know,
Yeah, no, that's true. We kind
that's
of like assume now that people will just have that familiarity, but
and I mean, not even older people. I mean, some people can't afford these devices and
yeah,
whatnot, right? And even Kim and I were talking about like just to get people out and more active, like how do we reach those ones that are shut in?
yeah,
So get their opinions on things, right?
that's right. Absolutely. Thanks, Marnie. So it's been kind of a definitely a journey for me to get interested in this topic academically. I definitely had a lot of interest as an individual with a disability um, because I realized that advocating for myself and advocating for others who might not have the opportunity to do it um, is something that is very important for me. So I I kind of did it through my work in several nonprofit organizations and learned from peers, people with disabilities, about different ways that they engaged to provide feedback to advance policy development process. And then I also became a part of a City of Vancouver's Persons with Disability Advisory Committee for 2 terms, obviously not long enough to learn everything about it, but long enough to understand how complex the process is and how little we know actually about the ways in which people with disabilities engage to provide feedback and the ways in which municipalities provide opportunities for this engagement. So that's how it became an interest of mine to look at it more closely from an exploratory perspective, primarily because I haven't really found much work done in this area. So I really wanted to understand what are people's experiences of serving on the accessibility advisory committees, and they had a lot of different names depending on municipality. And I was mostly working with municipalities in the Lower Mainland. There were 11 committees in total that I engaged with. So by attending the meetings, by talking to the staff and individuals who served on these committees. So there's lots of definitely discussion about citizen participation in some of the academic literature. There's this image of the ladder that was developed by this researcher Arnstein in 1969, so quite a long time ago. But she talked about different ladders and steps to citizen control. Citizen control is kind of the most power you can have as an individual within a participation process. And at the bottom is things like therapy, manipulation, which doesn't provide you much power. And of course, most of you probably heard about tokenism. So the idea of tokenism is you might be included in a formally into the process, but your voice is not actually being heard in a meaningful way. So sometimes people associate some consultations with a very tokenistic approach. And when looking at different municipalities, you can sort of place them at these different ladders in terms of how much power they give to the individuals around the table to be part of that process. So similarly, there's some work done around just looking at how important it is for people with disabilities to be participating in civic matters, because that's the kind of urban life is what actually impacts people's experiences on a daily basis. Yes, they engaging and going around your neighborhood, going to your community center, and just this everyday type of activities that that impact your life. So that's why it becomes quite an important area to look at what is individual citizenship, so your rights, your responsibilities around providing input into this life. What role does that play? And then there's some work that's been done around actually saying that there's such a thing as expertise by experience, because traditionally expertise has been mostly associated with people who have degrees in urban planning, or other degrees that maybe medical related, rehabilitation related, that sort of deny the expertise by experience. But now it's becoming much and much a big area of work really for many researchers to understand what that experience looks like and how that experience can inform policy development process. And of course, there's lots of work around this now. Well, some work around this now because of the Accessible BC Act. I just attended a webinar that looked at some of the standards that have been actually put out, standards around employment and service delivery. So it'll be interesting to see how they play out. But a big role in the development of the standards played the committee that was formed on the provincial level. Most of the individuals on that committee have disabilities. And so that's it's, again, it'll be interesting to see how much that expertise played a role in shaping the standards. And we know that in the legislation, there's also expectation around creating accessibility plan, having a public feedback tool. So all of this work, in a way, started as I was doing my research. So I think that's why I feel like, because of this early days of the Act, there's a lot of potential to kind of track how the engagement is working or not working. But I think my purpose at the time, it started about 3 years ago now, actually, the COVID times, to really explore how accessibility advisory committees function, what their role is, from the perspectives of people serving on the committees and the city staff. And I interviewed 33 individuals. Most of them were community members, people with disabilities, and I think about 6 people were city staff, but I don't think any of them identified as having disabilities. So I kind of looked through through all of the municipal structures of the committees, the ones that I've been working with, and they all had quite similar mandates, again, seeking advice from people with disabilities on issues related to urban planning. Membership and composition had some variability, but I would say that in terms of all of these categories, there's a lot of similarities. I would say the chairing responsibility, who chaired the meetings, was something that was different for the city of Vancouver for sure, because the chair of the committee was a person with from the community, person with a disability. Whereas and I think in this North Vancouver, can't remember right now, district or the city, Alexis, you can remind me about that. But
municipal, we're all 3.
That's right. Yes. But most of the things were certainly were certainly similar. They were kind of standard. And I don't necessarily think that people had a lot of input in shaping the structures. So again, looking ahead, I think it would be interesting to see how the legislation impacted the way some of these structures changed or haven't changed, because I know some of the municipalities decided to keep the same committees that they had. Kim, I'll let you ask you a question or make a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, Alfiya, thanks for coming in and talking about that, because I'm on the committee in Surrey, and I'm very, very disappointed. I can't say how disappointed I am. I brought up the chairing of the meetings with the city staff, because I was on the committee in Vancouver, and we're going back 30, 35 years ago. There was no problem with people with lived experiences chairing the committee, but I'm getting a lot of, I don't know what the issue, well, I think I know what the issue is, probably politics. I think they're afraid of what we're going to do. Like, I can't figure out why they're so afraid of letting us chair what I consider to be our meetings, but I gather the city considers them to be their meetings. But, you know, even co-chairing, are other municipalities, what are they doing? Is it the city employees chairing the meetings? Do you know?
I don't know, like at the time I was doing my research a couple of years ago, yes, they were primarily city staff chairing the meetings, but I guess with more push to the social model of disability, to really valuing the voices of people with disabilities. And I can see Alexis put in the chat that her sense was that during the development of standards, yes, all of the feedback was incorporated. So that's great. Maybe leading by example, and obviously there's lots of jurisdictional issues between the provincial level and municipal level, but I think examples like that, where you can see how the voices could be leading the work, the lived experience could be at the forefront, is beneficial. So, you know, I think it would probably take, I would be interested to go back to some of these municipalities to see what has been changing since the implementation of the act. But at that time when I was doing it, it was, yeah, mostly driven by the staff. Alexis, go ahead.
So yeah, that surprises me, being that, I mean, I've only been on the North Shore for the last 24 years. And I've been on that committee for 8. I just stepped away from it this past year, needed a break. But the person with lived experience has always chaired that meeting professionally, with Robert's rules of standard council practice.
Yeah,
it's actually quite a professional committee. And though change is slow, I have seen change. So I'm sad to hear that other municipalities are not, I guess, as progressive. I'll say that word as the North Shore, but I mean, we have a representative from each council, because we're tri-municipal, the committee, as well as a staff liaison from each council. And frequently, all of the council people have attended the meetings. The mayor of the District of North Van has only just recently shared it with another person. He was on the committee for most of the 8 years that I was on it. They're quite engaged about disability and accessibility and inclusion on the North Shore. I started to get a bit frustrated in the end, because more around the dynamics of the people with disabilities started to beat up each other, and some people were the squeaky wheel, and it was starting to get negative. To break from that, which was unfortunate. There's definitely, we've had very successful meetings in a full 7 years prior to that. And it's, again, I think it's for any committee, you need to be careful of the dynamics and the people that are brought on. the personalities and things to have a really successful committee to be effective.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I can speak for the West Shore communities here on the island. Most of them decided to go with what they call an internal staff committees. So that's been a bit of a challenge to shift the thinking around. I think that's where the challenge is. And I don't know, Kim, if that maybe is applicable there as well. It's just compliance and people reading the language, and again, thinking about the committees and the need to create the committee. They might think in terms of compliance that we need to have it, but in terms of the process and what it should look like, that it should actually align with the principle, nothing about us without us. I think that's where the misunderstanding is, or that the disconnect is. And I think the next step is to actually bridge that gap somehow. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly what's going on, is that disconnect. And the reason I'm so disappointed is because with our city, they did a great job of putting all the actions of complying with the act. So far, it sounds great on the website, but we were hardly involved. I remember there was only 3 or 4 of us committee members last summer involved in even creating the document. And I remember disagreeing with a lot of the stuff, and I said that I vehemently disagreed with some parts, and they said, oh, you can change it later. We need to get it done by September 1. You can always change it later. Oh yeah, well, later came, and I'm trying to change the things that I opposed, but now I'm told we'll just keep trying it for a while and see how it goes. One of them is, for example, is at least let us co-chair or chair and have input into the agenda. So to me, it just seems very political. And are they doing it just for the sake of doing it? Or do they really want to make meaningful change? And that's basically what I said last time. I mean, now our terms, we're only allowed to have a 2-year term now. Yeah. I mean, what can you get done in a 2-year term? We just, it takes a lot of time just to get to know each other. Anyways, you know what I mean. But I'm very disappointed. To be honest, I'm even thinking of writing to the premier.
Yeah. Alexis?
Your words were making me think that, though I know even that the North Shore Advisory Committee was the one that was included in the provincial information to follow and to show what municipalities could do, it is not perfect by any means, in the sense of when having, switching our name in a sense from the advisory committee to now what was going to be the accessible committee. Our representatives, we struggled with what was going on, because that it really felt like tokenism for us, because all of a sudden we were representing the 3 municipalities. All of a sudden the police boards jumped on, the libraries jumped on. They always fell under the municipal side of things, but we never really engaged with them. Now, all of a sudden, when they wanted and they needed to tick the box of an accessibility committee, all of a sudden we were represented. We were their representative, and we've never even advised in the 8 years that I was there on these different groups. So there was no question certain offshoots of municipalities were ticking a box to say that we ourselves were the committee, and we really pushed back on that. We did have very, very wholesome meetings. I used that word in my other statement about the provincial committee. Engagement with the plans themselves separately. Sorry, I should say 2 municipalities used the same a consulting firm who had people with disabilities leading it. Great discussions, hours of work. We don't normally work in the summertime, and we did. And then one other municipality did it very poorly and had to pull it back and try again a few months later, because we were just like, dudes, like, I actually went to the council meeting to say, please do not vote this in as your accessible. plan, because this is not what it is. It's not a diversity. It's not a kickoff of the DEI. This is a standalone document, you know. And anyway, we did a lot of engagement around that time.
Pat, go ahead.
I chaired the Capital Region District's Accessibility Advisory Committee. The committee wasn't actually formed and started to function until November of last year. And there's a whole pile of reasons for that. At this point, we're still in the process of developing our our action plan. And, hopefully at our next meeting, we'll make some more minor changes, and then it'll be out for public input, because that's the important part. It's not our document, it's people can comment on it. But part of the concern I have with the process and the committee setups is that they're voluntary. There's nothing in the act that regulates anything. The same thing with the draft standards. The draft standards will hear all this input, and then it won't be until 2005 that possibly some regulations will come into effect. So again, it will become a volunteer thing. What in my work history, I worked for a human rights commission and worked in the area of employment equity, and they were all volunteer programs, although matching the legislation. And so I spent most of my time convincing employers that while it was voluntary, they really did have to develop plans, and they did have to implement it, and we reviewed them annually. But we never actually had the regulated force to make sure that that happens. And that's what concerns me right now with the various committees and the various plans. Because the CRD is sort of has oversight over the 13 municipalities in Victoria. But that doesn't mean that they can tell municipalities what to do. It becomes incredibly complex, and that becomes a lot of learning for the actual committee, because many of us didn't know that when we jumped in. But at this point, we are making some progress, and I think that that's what's important. And as well, the important part is who's leading the process. I know that I meet with staff and we develop the agenda together and then have the agenda posted. So that's more of a collaborative kind of process. And I think collaboration is really good. I also recognize that while the majority, probably 90% of our committee members have lived experience, they all have different levels of experience. Some can only look at their own individual life, and others can look at the broader cross disability, cross. We already talked about it. The issues around poverty, which many folks that are involved in this process are not members of that group, and there's a reason for that, because they've never actually felt included. And I think that's really important for anyone serving on any kind of committee like this. Have to keep that in mind, that we're not responsible for what we think. We are responsible for individuals whose voice we don't hear. That's it. Thanks.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Pat, so much. Thanks, everyone, for sharing. Absolutely. I mean, the committees themselves, oftentimes the intention is to be diverse and to represent diversity of experiences, but you're right, there's still people who are excluded from this process, and people who might not have access to some of the spaces, who might not have the privilege of even spending time to serve, right? So focusing on survival, really. So yeah, that's an important reminder. Yeah, lots of the things you shared, I definitely something I've heard as well in the findings. But I think when talking with people on the committees, just finding the space and the voice to understand how they can contribute was really big theme in my conversations. And so, and like you, Pat, mentioned, a lot of people reflected both on their lived experience, but also on their background in accessibility research, planning. Yeah, because a lot of people do bring both, and so are able to bring in a lot of expertise for sure. But yeah, some were maybe less experienced in some areas and had a hard time, maybe feeling a bit intimidated, even though they wanted to be part of this group. They took their time to feel more confident to contribute in the spaces. So I think it really speaks to the importance of making sure that the spaces are welcoming, and that the language that's being used during the meetings, it's plain language that all people are able to engage in an equitable way. I think that's something that was brought up in my conversations. And then the people talked about the importance of bringing in both, or differentiating sometimes between advising and advocating. I think it becomes a very tricky balance to navigate. Sometimes these two things are in tension with each other. Some participants viewed advocacy, advising as something on the spectrum, but others saw the difference between the two about, in the kind of strategy that they chose, depending on the issue. Advising was perceived more collaborative and not as confrontational as advocacy. Some participants shared their frustration about things not getting done, or policymakers not reacting when when communication remains within the realm of advising. So in many situations, advocacy became the last resort to make sure their voice is heard. And so that depended on the issue for sure, but an important thing. So again, I don't know how much of it the terms of reference can actually reflect. The terms obviously talk about advising, they don't mention advocacy, but oftentimes they really go hand in hand. Alexis.
I'll say yes and no to that. You need to be also, because if we're speaking of the municipal advisory committees, aware of I guess the job that you're doing, and the who you can and cannot influence in that situation. So we, for example, the FIBS exchange, one of the large bus exchanges that's, I think, just finished getting redeveloped, had not incorporated a bathroom at all. And this bus exchange is in the middle of nowhere. Even though lots of development is happening, there's not stores coming. It's residential. And we were just like, people, like, this isn't just about disability. And so one of the council people advised us to write a letter to, and who to write it to have the advocacy to say, you need to do this. This is just the reality of the human experience, that people need to pee.
That's right.
So it was how it was presented. At the same time, how things are said during the committee as well is important to how it's taken. We know that people will turn off if you're sort of being poked at in a negative way.
Right.
So you have to, for better or for worse, it is a very similar advising and advocacy process, but you have to tiptoe with the right language to make it that way, because you are bound by this municipal stuff, and at the same time, sometimes what you want to change isn't a part of the municipal plan. So a bus loop isn't just provincial, isn't a municipal, it was provincial, and we wrote that to provincially. So being aware of what you have the power to change is important in these committees.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why there was definitely people having very different opinions and views on this. I think that's the beauty of qualitative research. You will not get the same responses to your questions, and that just to really reflect how complex it is. Like, yes, we sort of, the language in some of the policies can be interpreted very differently depending on who is reading that, and sometimes that's what ends up happening. I think given the time that we have, I just also wanted to make sure we have enough time, but briefly touching on a few other themes. This one is, and I am sure you will have a lot to contribute to this, is just around specific challenges that people talked about around, lack of consistency from different staff, oftentimes because of, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding in the area of accessibility. So depending on who you talk to, you will get different response. Poor communication feedback loop was mentioned. So you would provide an input, your feedback, you don't know what happens to that feedback, whether it's been integrated. If it's not been integrated, why? I think people just wanted to know the rationale for some of the things. Just transparency piece was very important. The process of applying to join the committees was not accessible. And again, it would be interesting to see if anything changed since the act. Sometimes lack of clarity, again, depending, even though there are terms of reference, people still were not always clear on what is the level of engagement that is expected. Some people, yes, met on a monthly basis, but the work that happened in between the meetings was not something that was discussed with them prior to joining. And I think, again, that the expectations need to be laid out very clearly, that yes, you need to read quite a bit, you need to think through, because sometimes these are complex documents, some policy documents, strategies. And if you want to do this work well, that takes time, right? So again, that transparency piece. Accessibility is a complex issue. I think a lot of both staff and people with disabilities talked about it. Everybody agreed with that. It's just how we go about addressing that complexity that was different. But yes, accessibility cuts across jurisdictional boundaries, and sometimes you're dealing with the issue of a bike lane, but there's a municipality next to it, and how they deal with that is very different. And so, but obviously we cross these boundaries every day oftentimes, right? So that consistency and maybe some unified approach on some of the issues is something that was mentioned. Legislation in general, when discussing the strategies, accessibility strategy that a lot of municipalities are either have or thinking about, some caution around that from people. Like, just yes, it's great. Yes, it's a step in the right direction, but it shouldn't be the end the end to the conversation and to the discussion. The standards, again, maybe thinking about some of the things as living documents, as something that can change, just like a lot of people talk about accessibility as a process rather than a destination. And yeah, thinking about accessibility in terms of other complex challenges that municipalities face, climate change, equity, diversity, and inclusion. A lot of things that are being brought up to the committees are kind of intersectional, right? So they do relate to the issues of climate justice, like use of plastic straws comes to mind, was a big discussion. Well, bike lanes too. It becomes a very contested issue for many people, and the need for people with disabilities to rely on cars to get around, and people arguing against that, right? So there's lots of tension there. And how do we how do we then align this, have a space for conversation, and that are productive? Because oftentimes it's not very productive, as Alexis, you were mentioning too. I put together with my co-investigator from the School of Occupational Health and Occupational Therapy at UBC, Ben Mortensen, a report that is, I'm willing to share it. It just covers most of the things I talked about, and going into more detail on that. So, and there's some recommendations there around how to improve some of these areas. Again, something that is easy to improve, more or less easy to address. Obviously, more complex issues, I really don't go into too much detail on that. But in terms of the next steps, I was thinking of, and again, open to feedback, but working on some resources for creating welcoming and disability-friendly public engagement spaces. And they can take multiple forms, many forms. It can be more of a video. It doesn't have to be an actual document. Compiling success stories on successful public engagement. I think a lot of times we focus a lot on some of the negative aspects of this, but there are a lot of positive stories, and I don't know if we hear enough about those. So I would be curious if maybe you would be interested in contributing to something like this, because that can really set up some really positive examples for moving forward. Developing a guide on how to translate lived experiences into policy recommendations. I think that's something, again, that was inspired by some of the interviews where people struggle to connect the two, and there's really no kind of guidelines on how to do that effectively. How do you move from describing what are some of your challenges, personal challenges, and how do you start translating it into policy recommendations? Conducting evaluation of the work of the existing committees, that's something I'm personally interested in. I think ongoing tracking, monitoring, and evaluation of whether they are meeting the expectations of meaningful engagement would be something that is important to do now, while we are in this process, so that we can correct as we go, rather than looking at it again 10 years later when yeah, it's just better to address things as they come up. And I am working on a 3 or 4 episode podcast that will be some interviews with people who were part of this research, available soon. I just need to finalize a few things, but I'll be sharing the link with you. It's very short, just 3-4 episodes, so very succinct. And I think that's it. So this is just my contact information. Let's be in touch. I'm really would be very excited to work with you in any of the areas that I've identified, or if you have specific interest, we can think about how we can move this work forward. And this is just a website of the overall project that my project was part of. So inclusivemap.ca. So you can check that out as well.
Can I jump in? Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, back into when you were talking about the expectations of the work in the committees. And yes, it's very important to share that. And even though in our terms of reference that we share with new people, it is laid out that the North Shore is once a month for the large meeting with encouragement for in-person if they can, but there's subcommittee meetings all the other Thursdays. So as needed. So
Right.
And what has developed over the years and slowly began to be too much for certain people with disabilities, so it all got on me. And I worried that it's lost now that I've left, is whenever we'd have a subcommittee about a planning, a streetscape, a park, a building, whatever it may be, we actually wrote a report. So it wasn't just assuming that somebody took the notes down correctly. A staff liaison for whichever municipality it was for took the notes for us and then sent the notes to whoever was doing the report. It was either Amy or I for many years. And we would put all of the recommendations. So the staff person put a bit about what the project was all about, and then we wrote all of our recommendations at the bottom because we didn't want them to just go astray. So yes, it made for a lot of work when you're also working in things, but and we started to incorporate over the last couple of years a timeline on the end. And we were actually encouraged by one of the council members on the committee going, so did they do anything? And we're like, we don't really know. So we started over the last 2 years adding, please let us know what you have and have not been able to incorporate within a time frame. We actually asked the time frame during the meeting, 3, 6, 90 days on what you have and have not been able to incorporate from our recommendations and the why. And we are getting responses. It's average, and this is municipal work. This, and they have, citizens have a right to ask, and you are a committee working, for the municipality. So if I can recommend anything for the committees these days, yes, it makes for more work, but make a report of the notes. Start taking notes and make a report. Submit it. In the North Shore, the reports get to the council liaisons, and then they put it to the staff liaisons, and then they put it forward to the right departments who need to see these recommendations, and then they have to write the feedback on what they have and have not done. So shit ton of work over the years, but it's been very effective. It was frustrating for some, and they've come and gone on the committee because change takes time. But I can say that building plans are now crossing my path with the accessible, automatic door opener on recycling and garbage areas. I sit also on the design advisory design panel for the District of North Van. So I actually see private buildings there, because the municipal level, you only see public. And there's not a lot of public, also in rec centers and schools you don't see because they sit outside of municipal. But there's also design panels within your municipality, and they each should have somebody with a disability on it. And so on the North Shore, they do have that. So I sit and see private buildings in the district, and it's really cool. I sit with the architects and landscape people, and so there's lots of opportunity for engagement. It's just not everyone knows about it, and you just gotta make them do it in their right voice. I know it's hard and it's slow, but I see change. I do. I have seen it in the 8 years. Balconies, all balconies at 0 threshold. I'm like, duh, it only makes sense.
That's great. That's great to hear, Alexis. Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts? Jacques, nice to see you.
I'll share a local win, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of a District of West Van came to the committee a year or so ago, and they were developing very quickly a waterfront exercise outdoor area. And the plans came to the ACDI, which is the name of the North Shore Committee, and we're like, you don't even know how to. I work out all the time and was able-bodied for 30 years. I don't know how to use this equipment. What is it for? So went Googling and encouraged them to incorporate some outdoor features for people who are seated and or need to do things in a chair version. And it's just opened recently in Ambleside Park. And somebody in a wheelchair can do bench presses and lifts and things because there's accessible equipment there. They did it. And it's pretty neat. And that was just last month.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I'm hoping to focus more on this again over the summer, because this work has been sort of on the side for me for quite a while. So I'm looking forward to getting back to it. So if you have ideas, if you would like to work on something together, I'm very open to it. All right. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.